Hola y bienvenidos, bienvenidos a la segunda parte de la lección acerca de la concordancia de sujeto y verbo. Okay, so we're going to talk about these tricky subjects, right? Going beyond just the base subject pronouns now. And then I'm going to show you a little bit of a magic formula when it comes to accuracy of sentence structure. Our first tricky subject is an impersonal subject. This is a subject that isn't necessarily a person. If you recall my description of a subject in the first lesson, I described a subject as an entity. And beyond people, the subject could be places, things, ideas, or even activity. La escuela is an example of an impersonal subject. Let's say you wanted to use ser to characterize school, right? In the present simple, you would say la escuela es. As in the example, la escuela es importante. Here's our next impersonal subject, and it's a little bit trickier. Los libros de Rodolfo Anaya, or in English, the Mexican-American author Rodolfo Anaya's books. This one is a little tricky because you have los libros and Rodolfo Anaya. Rodolfo Anaya is singular, a man. But what are we going to characterize? What are we talking about? Are we talking about Anaya? No, we're talking about his books, right? So we have to conjugate our verb according to los libros. So let's use ser again, right? To say, for example, Anaya's books are interesting. Los libros de Rodolfo Anaya son. Los libros de Rodolfo Anaya son muy interesantes. Let's take a look at this one. Los trabajos del siglo XXI, 21st century jobs. Let's use the verb requerer. Requerer, meaning to require, should look familiar. And it's because it is the verb querer, to want, with the prefix re added. Now, as these subjects get trickier and trickier to identify, I'd like to show you a trick that I have used to help me make my conjugations more accurate. I call this trick the it-them test. If you're conjugating a verb, you're not too sure how to conjugate it, you're trying to think about the subject, and the subject is impersonal, you can ask yourself, am I talking about it or am I talking about them? Let's look at our first two examples. When we talk about school, are we talking about it or them? We're talking about it as just a general idea, right? So we're saying it is, right? Not it are, right? Anaya's books, or Rodolfo Anaya's books. Are we talking about it or them? Now we're talking about them, right? Now it lives in the el-ella conjugation, right? As in es, right? But if you are talking about them, well, anything them would live in this conjugation cell with ellos, ellas. So you would need the ellos, ellas conjugation as in los libros de Rodolfo Anaya son muy interesantes. Now, let's look at our next example. What is our conjugation of requerer going to be? I'll give you a hint to say they want is quieren. Los trabajos del siglo XXI requieren la colaboración y la innovación. Now let's take a look at compound subjects. Usually the first complex subject I remind students about is mis amigos y yo. The typical mistake that I see made is students will conjugate the verb according to just the subject pronoun yo. But we're talking about mis amigos y yo. A good strategy here is to think, where would the subject, mis amigos y yo, live in the conjugation chart? So I've drawn a conjugation chart for you here. Where would this subject live, or where would it land? It would land in the nosotros conjugation because you're talking about my friends and I. We like, or we do, whatever. As in this example, mis amigos y yo comemos juntos. My friends and I eat together. A complex subject could be two or more people. Elian y Rodrigo. How would you say Elian and Rodrigo are best friends, for example? Elian y Rodrigo son amigos mejores. This example takes two impersonal subjects, matemáticas y química, math and chemistry. How would you say math and chemistry can be difficult? I've made this another close passage or fill in the blanks. You have to conjugate poder, which is a stem change, so I'll give you a hint. The O goes to UE. Matemáticas y química pueden ser difíciles. Math and science together as a complex subject, right? You're talking about them, and so they live here with the ellos, ellas conjugation. I thought of one more tricky subject in the last minute here. It is mi familia, or my family. So how would you conjugate ser to say my family is very big? This one is going to be mi familia es muy grande. And the reason why a lot of people get tricked by this is because when they think of family, they think, oh, I think I'm talking about them, right? But a family is technically a single entity, so you need to use the singular conjugation es. Now, oftentimes my students ask me for some kind of formula or some kind of structure to ensure that they write accurate sentences in the future. I'm going to give you kind of the base, okay, and then we'll build upon that a little bit, but we're not going to go too complex there because we don't need to yet, because we're beginning intermediate speakers and writers. The very base is the same as the title of our lesson, subject plus verb, right? You state your subject and then you conjugate your verb. A very simple example, yo bailo. I dance. Now, it's important to note that you don't need the subject pronoun. You can simply say bailo. The subject is often implied in the conjugation of the verb. Now, you can put something before the subject and you can put something after the verb. Before the subject, you could put some kind of transition, such as an adverbial clause. I'll give you an example. Typically speaking, typically is an adverb, so like typically speaking, comma, dogs, subject, for example, okay? After the verb, you can put a complement. It's the most typical thing to follow a verb. A complement simply means more detail pertaining to the action or the description stated in the verb. You can also put a conjunction, such as because, which would introduce another clause related to the previous clause. So I've given you two similar examples using my dogs as the subject, okay? Típicamente, mis perros ladran por la mañana. Typically, my dogs bark in the morning, right? Here's your transition, or I guess an introductory clause. Mis perros, subject, ladran, verb, por la mañana, that is your complement. And then my second example, using the conjunction. Típicamente, mis perros ladran porque tienen hambre. Typically, my dogs bark because they're hungry, right? So everything is the same up until this conjunction because, which introduces a new clause, and typically that clause is related to the previous one, as in they are hungry. Y eso concluye nuestra lección acerca de la concordancia del sujeto y verbo. Muchas gracias por su esfuerzo y energía. Gracias y adiós.